We are live now. Hey, Sandy, Tess, Karen, thanks for joining. It's amazing what technology can do nowadays.
I love seeing all the names.
Yeah.
And the states. There's Maine.
Yeah. Mike Hammer's a big one. He's a great contributor. That's right, Sam, except Anne with an E.
And with an E. Massachusetts, Kansas, Minnesota. Wow, Florida, Austin.
Margaret's in with Maryland, I think. Margaret's Musings. And Monica. I think you're in Florida, right, Monica? She's a big sharer. Oh, wow. We're at 500. Okay. So I guess we should get going. So, yeah, this is a surprise to some of y'all. We didn't do our post yet of good news for the day, but we will after this, directly after that. So check that out. And this will be released next week on the podcast network. So if you have to leave in the middle of this or whatnot, we will release this widely next week. So right now I have the pleasure of introducing Anne Applebaum, who is a Pulitzer Prize-winning New York Times best-selling author, journalist, historian, and writer for The Atlantic. So thanks for joining me today. How are you?
I'm fine. I'm joining you from Warsaw, Poland. So it's a long way away, but there in spirit.
Well, absolutely. And we had chatted right before this. I guess one of the things that some people had asked me to ask you is that to start off, have you ever seen anything similar to this kind of Trump and Musk combination of this like insanely rich oligarch and this powerful person combining in this sort of thing? Like, has that existed before?
It certainly has. There are some unique things about the moment that I'll say in a second, but what they're doing, in other words, taking over the institutions of the state, politicizing regulatory agencies, politicizing the civil service, making civil servants who are historically in our country loyal to the Constitution, not to a particular person or ruling party. They want to turn them into loyalists, make them pass purity tests, putting pressure on media, all that stuff we've seen before. We've seen it in Hungary. We've seen it in Venezuela. It can be right wing. It can be left wing. This is how you take over the state. This is how most democracies fail. They don't fail because of tanks or coup d'état or some colonels shooting up the chandeliers. They fail because elected leaders decide to unlevel the playing field. So we have in democracies institutions that preserve a level playing field, and they try to capture them and politicize them for themselves. So that is completely, this is like everything about it is standard. It's also very standard for very powerful people to work with rich people and for rich people to seek to have both political and economic power. I mean, this is what an oligarch is. Somebody who has access both to his own private resources and state resources, and who somehow mixes sometimes state and private. So, for example, somebody who runs Gazprom, the Russian gas company, he's both a representative of the state and he's making money privately. And it's hard to say really which is which, or he's loyal to, he's somehow he's involved with both. There's some unique things here. I mean, I just had this conversation with another friend of mine who watches these things. I don't think I've ever seen a state capture happen in this way. In other words, that teams of engineers go into the American government and get the passwords and become system administrators of computer systems and take over that way. I think that's new. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe somebody will on your podcast will, or on your, well, maybe one of your listeners will point out some previous example. But usually when these things happen, they can happen pretty fast. That they can, but they don't usually happen in days, because usually it takes time to pressure the bureaucrats and so on. But the way that Trump and Musk are working together to both to fire people randomly to intimidate people online. So it's not just that they destroyed or eliminated USAID, it's also that they smeared USAID and they, alternately made up things, that it did, or they took out of context programs that it was running, and they made it look like something evil. Whereas USAID actually provides 40% of the world's humanitarian aid, and has been a really important tool of American soft power all over the world for many decades. So this is new to me. The way they're doing it is new, but that rich people together with illiberal politicians try to capture the state happens. This is very normal. I mean,
Yeah.
left wing, right wing. It hasn't happened in our country before, but it's happened in other countries.
What do you think the plan is that the Trump team is executing in regards to Ukraine, and is does Putin have a role in that? And most importantly, I really wanted to know, if, with these attacks on Zelensky, calling him a dictator, spreading this kind of propaganda where he started the war, that kind of stuff. How does Zelensky respond to it? Like it seems it's like a tight place to be in right now.
So I don't know what Trump's plan is, honestly. I mean, and I'm not sure there is one. I do know that almost everything that he's saying is lifted directly from Russian propaganda. The idea that Zelensky is illegitimate, that he's not really the leader. I mean, this is what the Russians have been saying for a long time. And remember, it's a lot. Given that Putin there hasn't been a free election in Russia for decades. And they don't even really pretend anymore. I mean, there aren't really any. Putin runs without opponents, that kind of thing.
Right.
Makes it, of course, even more grotesque. But it's using that kind of language, using that language about the war, in combination with this demand that the Ukrainians pay 50% of all their national assets indefinitely into the future to the U.S. And by the way, it's unclear whether that means to the U.S. Treasury or to some U.S. private companies. That's left unclear in a document that would be unenforceable in any court of law. I mean, that all looks very strange. They handed Zelensky essentially a document that he can't sign. I mean, legally impossible to sign, and then attacked him. After he refused to sign it. Maybe the idea is to twist his arm in such a way that he signs something, and maybe this is part of that plan. I really don't know. Unfortunately, what it looks like to a lot of Europeans is Trump, in effect, saying, we want to end the war on Russia's terms. We want, we're not going to offer Ukraine any security guarantees. And with the point is, maybe I should make that clear. If you could have a ceasefire in Ukraine, I mean, you could get everybody to stop fighting for a while. But if you don't have some assurance that Russia won't attack again, like 6 months later or 6 years later, then Ukraine will fail. I mean, it will be a failed state. Who will want to live there? Who will want to invest there? And I think this is what the Russians want. They want a kind of failed situation where then they can use propaganda or maybe further military attacks to destabilize. So they haven't given up their main goal, which is the destruction and occupation of Ukraine and the removal of Ukraine's sovereignty. And why Trump seems to be going along with that now, I can't say. Whether he's going to reverse himself again, I don't know. A few weeks ago, he was still saying that Russia was losing the war, that what we needed to do was, increase aid to Ukraine. I mean, he said this some weeks ago. Why he flipped, what flipped him, who flipped him, I can't say. But it's what he's shifted now is to, he all the language that he's using about Zelensky is language that comes from Russian propaganda and from the kind of pro-Russian propaganda you see on the internet.
And what do you think is our way through this? I guess the word is nightmare. What do you recommend, based on history, Americans do to fight back?
And first of all, remember that there's always a second act, and there's always another chance, and it's very important not to give up or lose hope or think nothing you do matters or stay home or stop watching the news. It's very, very tempting to stop watching the news. I mean, believe me, I feel this. My desire to turn it off is very high. you know, but remember that, what that's what they want. So what oligarchs do, what autocrats do, what dictatorships do is they overwhelm people with the feeling of powerlessness, that they can't, that they're unable to do anything. Remember that you can stay engaged. You can call your congressman. And a lot of people have been doing that, and that's been very useful. Call your congressman, call your senators, tell them what you think. You can and should make a plan to be involved in local politics. One of the problems we have in the United States is that national politics is so remote to most people. It's like a reality show. It's not really clear how it affects your life. Um, and a lot of American communities have lost their local newspapers at the same time and are unaware of how local politics work. Your local leaders matter, your state senators matter, your state legislators matter. Make a plan to be involved in those elections and those campaigns. Find community groups you can be a part of. Find ways of contributing. The more active you are, the more active citizens are, the more influence you have. We lose our influence when we move back, when we give up, when we retreat into online worlds where everything looks distant and fake. So try to be involved in the real world and in real politics. I would say, those are the two things that you can do right now. Keep yourself informed and keep yourself engaged.
And you've been I think you had the chance to experience the falling of the Berlin Wall. Do you see any parallels to how things are going right now? And can you tell us about your experience there?
So I was living in Poland in 1989. I was a very junior journalist. And it's a long, I won't tell the whole story, but essentially we drove from Warsaw to Berlin. I drove with a person who was another journalist who I'm now married to, but I wasn't married to him then. We drove to Berlin. We arrived in the middle of the night. We got there when everybody was kind of drunk and they were sitting on the wall. And it was after the cameras were gone and people had stopped singing the German national anthem or popping champagne corks. And it was a little bit creepy. And people started jumping off the wall. They jumped off the wall into the east side. There were two walls, and there was a kind of no man's land in between. And there were these security guards there, and people were teasing the security guards, and they were jumping at them. And the security guards would throw them back. And so years later, I found out that night, the East German Politburo was meeting somewhere not that far away, trying to decide, decide whether they should shoot people, basically, whether they should stop all this chaos at the wall. Anyway, that didn't happen, and history went differently. The current moment is, I don't want to quite compare it to the fall of the wall, but you could say what we're living through could be the reversal that people like Putin have wanted for a long time. So we all experienced the fall of the wall as a great triumph for democracy, for liberal values, for liberal, for open markets, and so it turned out to be. Central Europe became part of Europe, became part of NATO. We've had several decades now of peace on a continent where there was, dictatorship and war in the past. So it's been we've had this marvelous period of luck. Some people experience the fall of the Berlin Wall as a huge tragedy, and Putin is one of them. So he was actually in the KGB at that time. While I was on the wall, he was at the KGB office in Dresden, burning his files, which he's written about and given interviews about and is upset about. And what he's dreamed of for many, many years is a reversal of that process, that the U.S. would withdraw from Europe, that liberal values would recede from Europe, and that he would once again be able to control at least Eastern Europe and maybe even Germany, as they controlled part of Germany in the past. So he's hoping that what Trump means is a reversal of that era. And actually, I was told by a Russian friend that in Moscow they were talking about Trump as the American Gorbachev. And by that, they didn't mean the person who brought democracy to Russia. They meant the person who brought the system down. And so I'm not saying that will happen, but that's what they hope. So what I worry that could happen is that kind of reversal, the reversal of the gains that we've made.
Right. And we always like to. Oh, I guess there is one question from the crowd I wanted to make sure Lori West asked is things like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. Should we be worried about these programs? It seems like they're trying to attack them and maybe take money away from them and then give it to tax cuts to the rich or something like that. Is that something we should be worried about? Is that something people, uh, in this environment should be concerned about?
Yes, you should be concerned about it. I don't know whether it will happen.
Right.
It made me, I mean, Trump does care about opinion polls, and maybe this will be too far for him. I don't know. But, are there people in the Republican caucus who want to do this, who want to lower taxes dramatically and take money away from Social Security and Medicare in order to do it? Yes, yes, there are such people.
Right.
One of the things to understand about what Elon Musk is doing right now is all this talk of like efficiency and money cutting and so on, the programs that he's cut so far are a tiny fraction of what the American government spends. The USAID was less than 1%. It was nothing. The real money is in Social Security, Medicare, and of course the Pentagon. And if they really are serious about cutting the federal budget, then they have to go for those programs because that's where the money is. They can't get to them by trimming a few thousand employees here or there. That's not going to save that much money. So sooner or later they will have to have this argument about those agencies. And you can see that Musk is already looking at it because he's actually posted some false claims about Social Security. That Social Security was being paid out to dead people and so on. Many of which turned out not to be true because people who understand how the system works and who've seen the data before were able to say, no, that's not what it says. But they're certainly looking at it and they're certainly thinking about it.
Right. Yeah, that's scary. We saw. I mean, in private circles, there have been Republicans who have told me, people who are sort of anti-Trump Republicans, trusted enough where I can have a conversation with them, where they're nervous and they're getting death threats and things like that. But I get death threats. I'm sure that everyone in our line of work gets those
I get
nowadays. Yeah,
that.
I mean that's what. So it's kind of like, either step up or get out of the way. And with that, since there's so many folks who actually use those resources that they have paid into and things like that, I always like to end every interview with inspiring words from my guests. So let's say someone's struggling with all this going on right now, and especially with Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, probably being under attack shortly. What would you say to them?
I would say make friends. So find the people who feel the same way you do, whatever political camp they've come from. Um, build your own coalition around you. Find the people who care, find people who you can talk to, who share these concerns, and then find a way to be active. I mean, another thing that I often find in these situations, I lived through a version of this in Poland, which is where I lived part of the time. We had an illiberal government for several years, and people had the same panicky reactions. One of the things that it helps to do something. What really makes you feel bad is feeling helpless. I'm going to lose something, or something's going to be damaged, and I can't do anything about it. Just remember that you can do things. And again, I am repeating myself now, but being engaged, trying to be effective, creating a group or a club or a local coalition or joining an existing group, that'll make you feel better. It'll make, do something, and that will help you. It will not only help your country, it'll also help you psychologically get through the next, weeks or months.
Absolutely. But maybe picking our way through the darkness, we will find that together we can resist them. Um, that's from
That's a line from my book. Yeah.
right, from Twilight of Democracy, but which will have links to Anne's books as well. Um, Thank you so much for joining me today. If you all across the world, India, Germany, Russia, Finland, um, I guess 50 different countries. So thank you all for joining us and taking the time. We'll have our post of good news coming out right after this, and this interview will be posted next week. And Applebaum, I'd be happy to have you on again to give us an update in the near future. And thank you so much for taking the time today. We really appreciate it.
Great. I'm delighted to join you. Thanks a lot.
Onward.